So I'll like to ask Air Marshal sir your views on the role of Africa in India's clear vision for a free and Indo-Pacific.
Well, as Professor Fulu, emphasized particularly on the economic development and strengthening Africa. So I think for the Indo-Pacific, we want to keep it as a zone of peace. If you remember, if you go back to the during the Cold War period, India consistently projected, the Indo-Pacific to remain free of nuclearization as well. So these are all fundamentally what we are saying is let's concentrate on building mutual relations and focus on enhancing the economic and social capabilities in the African countries. Address education, address development, infrastructure development. There's a huge, massive scope, and China is gaining by working on those infrastructure and building, and India should actually participate as well. And that would, like Professor Fulu pointed out, Somalia, if you address development, provide better quality of living to the people, and give them more opportunities in terms of education, in other areas, piracy will automatically die.
Yes.
It's when the country remains poverty ridden, then obviously they're going to look at and not united and it's fragmented. This is going to be the result. So while you can address piracy through a police action up to a certain amount of time, I think the core problem is development. And that has been the problem, how the West has dealt with, Africa for ever since 1945, is that they've looked at it as a massive resource base for their raw materials rather than pouring in money to help them develop. And they've realized the younger population, Africa is going to be, huge young population after India, moves beyond its demographic dividend. And at some point of time, the African continent will be the heavily populated continent in the world as well. So the potential for enormous growth, enormous work developments is already recognized there. So in that context, I think Indo-Pacific must be seen. While yes, a rules-based world order, but whose rules? We must ask that question as well. It needs to be an equitable world order. It needs to be a multipolar world order. And when I had an interaction with one of the American teams, I explained the rules based world order was nothing new to India if you look at Indian history. 1,000 years before, there was a Chola Empire, and when Chola's trade with China was being interfered with piracy supported by the Shailendra kingdom based in Malaysia and the parts of Indonesia, the Emperor Rajendra sent an expeditionary force to defeat that kingdom, destroy that 700-year-old kingdom, and then open up the trading routes all over again and make it safe. And what must be remembered is the Chola Empire did not go there out to conquer and occupy lands. They achieved their objectives, left them alone, and then came back. As long as the trade was not interfered with, that is rules-based world order. The idea is so we need to think about that very carefully, and that is where the organization like IORA and interaction between global South amongst themselves and creating a much larger center of gravity in the world order by the global South would make a huge difference in the way the Indo-Pacific domain, is addressed. If you only leave it to the existing geopolitical processes, which is the legacy of the post 1945 world order, we are not going to find solutions. We will continue to be in geopolitical conflict for a long time. On the other hand, I think if we understand each one, whether it's China, the Russia, the Americas, or Francis, if all of us say that the Indo Pacific needs to be open, clear for all of us to actually use it, all of us to be free to sail around establish interactions with all the countries of the region. 48 countries are the Indian Ocean rim area countries who are members of the IORA. And if we get together and we actually raise the voice, and I think the Indo-Pacific can be a far more peaceful enabler. It is also the warmest oceans in the world, has the maximum, biological wealth in the seas. And therefore, there are a lot of issues that are involved. From the climate change angle, we need to actually preserve, protect the oceans. Sea level rise is a huge threat. And then ocean environment and sea life needs to be protected. I think the industrial revolution and the legacies of the colonial and imperial practices have actually sort of has actually given out a huge amount of greedy practices in exploiting the planet. I think we need to move away from that approach. And that approach is essentially what I would call Eastern civilizational approach, which is to live with the environment and preserve the environment and preserve your relations with countries on a peaceful way without dominating it.
As we are talking about the root base, you just mentioned, and we are talking about the Indo-Pacific, the preserving ocean life, etc. I also would like to just emphasize we somewhere we forgot or we somewhere failed. I will not hesitate to say the economic underperformance due to the lack of governance, and that's why when we are now trying to exploit or trying to utilize the ocean resources, the aspect of climate change which we all are facing, which it should really be emphasized upon, and governance is also one very important thing which will ensure some kind of transparency also between both the countries, where we see lot of Africa has already seen that because of lack of transparency how the country has been kind of exploited. Just to add on the element of governance.
Yes, Namrata. In fact, I would add one, and I'm sure Professor Fulu would be aware of that. In like the point, instead of giving in more constructive assistance for a country to develop further, uh, the ocean pollution has been a massively escalating, process over the last few decades. And how does that happen? Much of the developed world have taken their waste, packed those waste to be sent off to developing countries. Many countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia has woken up. India has been a victim as well. I mean, because for small business concerns, it is actually business. They're getting money to actually receive the waste and then dump it off somewhere else. Where does it go? It's in the seas around us. It's in the oceans around us, around Africa, around in the Indian Ocean, in Bay of Bengal, and Arabian Sea. The pollution levels are phenomenal, and much of the contribution to those pollution levels, apart from our own mismanagement, much of the waste from Europe and America actually comes and gets dumped here. This needs to be flagged. It's a very important issue that needs to be addressed. Those countries who develop their waste, they need to manage it themselves. There is no question of packing it and sending it off somewhere else, and that is not business. That is actually killing. It's another way of exploitation. So there are a lot of areas I think we need to actually look at, open our eyes in a bigger way, and look at the practices that have been done over the last 75 years, and we need to question everything in this process.